We've been fed the same lie our entire lives. Success only belongs to those who never stop running. Work harder, make more money, climb higher, because slowing down means falling behind. Life, they tell us, is a race, and if you're not moving forward, you're losing. But what if that's not true? What if the endless hustle isn't the path to happiness, but the very thing keeping you from it? What if meaning isn't found in chasing the next big goal, but in stopping long enough to ask, why am I running in the first place? This is the story of my friend, a man who walked away from the hustle at 40. He had spent decades grinding, chasing promotions, making money, doing everything right. And then one day he stopped. Not because he was forced to, not because he had nothing left to give, but because he finally asked himself, what am I really running toward? At first he felt something strange, not regret, not boredom, but an unfamiliar emptiness. Not the emptiness of loss, but the emptiness of peace. For the first time in his life, there were no deadlines, no pressure, no constant battle to stay ahead. And that's when he realized, maybe life was never supposed to be a race. Maybe the real secret isn't running faster, it's knowing when to stop. This isn't a call to quit your job tomorrow. This is about questioning the narrative we've all been trapped in. It's about understanding that success is meaningless if it costs you your life. On Victory Stoic, we don't just follow the crowd, we redefine what it means to live with purpose. If you're ready to break free from the illusion of endless hustle, like, share, subscribe, and comment, I choose balance. Now let's dive in. Number 1, the strange emptiness of peace. Jack had spent his entire life running. Not literally, he wasn't the type to wake up at 5 a.m. for a jog, but metaphorically, he had been sprinting his whole life. From one deadline to another, one promotion to the next, one project to the next, big thing. He was the guy who replied to emails at midnight, who carried his laptop to vacations, who thought free time was just an opportunity to be more productive. And then one day, he stopped. Not because he crashed, not because he failed, but because he had won the game and realized the prize wasn't what he expected. Jack retired at 40. No more meetings, no more corporate politics, no more pretending to care about synergy or leveraging cross-functional alignment, whatever that even means. He thought he would feel victorious. Instead, he felt something he had never felt before: emptiness. But not the kind of emptiness that comes from loss or regret. This was the emptiness of peace. For the first time in his life, there was no pressure, no expectations, no inbox demanding his soul in exchange for a paycheck. Just silence. And it terrified him. Jack had spent decades training himself to equate busyness with purpose. So when the noise stopped, he felt like he was floating in space, weightless, unanchored, unsure if he even existed without a calendar full of obligations. He tried to fill the silence. He woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, sat at his desk, and stared at an empty screen. He thought about creating a new project, a side hustle, something to justify his existence. But then a strange thought hit him. What if I don't have to? What if life wasn't about constant movement? What if the real meaning wasn't in the next milestone, but in learning to just be? The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And Jack realized he had wasted years believing that being busy meant being alive. So for the first time, he stopped trying to achieve his way into fulfillment. He sat with the quiet. He drank coffee without rushing. He took long walks with no destination. He read books for no reason other than enjoyment. And in that emptiness, he discovered something shocking. He was happier than he had ever been. Jack's story isn't about quitting your job. It's about questioning whether your life is filled with meaning or just filled with motion. Because if you never learn to sit with yourself, how will you ever know who you really are when the noise fades? Number 2, the obsession with being busy. Jack didn't just wake up one day and decide to stop hustling. No, he had been programmed, just like the rest of us, to believe that constant busyness was the only way to prove his worth. From the time we are children, we are fed the same lie. Work hard, stay busy, and one day you'll be successful. As if success is a finish line we can cross. As if running faster, working longer, and sacrificing more will magically get us there. No one ever tells you that the race never actually ends. Jack had been running that race since childhood. Gold stars in elementary school turned into honor roll in high school, which became a high GPA in college, which then transformed into a relentless corporate grind. At every stage, the message was the same: keep going or you'll fall behind. He remembered being a kid, watching his grandfather sit on the porch, staring at the sky. Jack thought he was wasting time. Why wasn't he doing something? Why wasn't he checking off a to-do list, achieving something, working toward a goal? Now, decades later, Jack found himself sitting on his own porch, realizing that maybe his grandfather had figured it out all along. But breaking free from the hustle mindset wasn't easy. The first few weeks after quitting his job, Jack felt restless. Not because he had things to do, but because he didn't. He was addicted to motion. He felt guilty for not filling his schedule, for not grinding, for not maximizing his potential. And then one day, while mindlessly scrolling through LinkedIn, he saw a post that made him pause. It was a photo of a man on his deathbed with the words, "No one wishes they worked more." Jack stared at it for a long time. He thought about all the weekends he had spent at the office instead of with his family, the birthdays he had missed because of work trips, the hours lost in front of a laptop, chasing deadlines that no one would remember. And he asked himself, what exactly was I rushing toward? The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "Most of what we do is unnecessary, but we've been brainwashed into believing that if we aren't working, we aren't valuable." And Jack realized he didn't want to be another person who spent his entire life building a future he never actually got to enjoy. So he did the most radical thing possible. He stopped, and in that stillness, he finally understood. Busyness is not purpose. Movement is not progress. And if you're always running, you might never realize you're heading in the wrong direction. Number 3, is success really worth losing everything? Jack wasn't the only one who learned this lesson too late. Steve Jobs, one of the most celebrated visionaries of our time, reached the peak of success, only to realize at the end of his life that he had been chasing the wrong prize. Before he passed away, Steve Jobs wrote a reflection that stunned the world. In it, he admitted that despite all the wealth, power, and influence he had accumulated, he still felt empty. He spoke about how, lying in a hospital bed, he realized that the things he had spent his whole life pursuing, money, achievements, external validation, were meaningless compared to the simple joys he had ignored: love, family, and health. Jack had spent years believing the same lie. More money would make him happier. More success would make life more fulfilling. And so he worked and worked and worked, and he succeeded. He had the 6-figure salary, the luxury car, the big house. He had status, recognition, and influence. But when he finally sat in his dream home with no work left to do, he felt nothing. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just an eerie silence. For years, Jack had been so busy running that he never stopped to ask himself, where am I actually going? He had spent his entire adult life climbing a ladder, only to reach the top and realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. Steve Jobs, in his final moments, acknowledged the same thing. Non-stop pursuing of wealth will only turn a person into a twisted being, just like me. He warned others not to fall into the same trap he did, chasing success so hard that they forget to actually live. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Jack had spent years wasting time, not by being lazy, but by being too busy to notice what really mattered. So the question is, what are you working for? Is it for a life you actually want, or just for the illusion of success that someone else told you was important? Jack realized that true success isn't about wealth or status. It's about whether, at the end of your life, you can look back and say, I truly lived. Steve Jobs didn't get a second chance, but Jack did. And if you're reading this, so do you. Number 4, you don't always need a grand plan or a huge goal. Jack used to believe that life had to be a constant mission, that if he wasn't working towards some big project, some grand achievement, then he was wasting his time. For years, he structured his life around milestones. The next promotion, the next business venture, the next investment. He was always planning, always strategizing, always trying to get ahead. But the funny thing is, he never actually arrived. And then after quitting his job, he had no plan. For the first time in his life, there was nothing big to work toward. No deadlines, no targets, just life. At first, it was terrifying. Without a grand ambition, who was he? Without a next step, was he just existing? Then one morning, everything changed. Jack was sitting on his porch sipping coffee, watching the sunrise, and for some reason he noticed things he never had before. The way the sky shifted from dark to gold, the sound of birds waking up, the warmth of the cup in his hands. And he felt happy, not because he had just signed a big deal, not because he had achieved something monumental, but simply because he was there, because for the first time he was actually paying attention. How often do we stop and ask ourselves, what actually makes me happy? Not what looks good on paper, not what society says should fulfill us, but what genuinely brings joy in the simplest way. Maybe it's reading a book in silence. Maybe it's taking a slow walk without checking your phone. Maybe it's hearing your child's laughter or feeling the warmth of the sun on your face. But we ignore those things because they don't seem important. They don't come with a promotion, a title, a paycheck. So we dismiss them. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Give yourself a gift, the present moment, because in the end, that's all we truly have." Jack finally understood this. He no longer felt guilty for not chasing something huge, because he realized that the biggest achievement in life isn't always the next milestone. It's being present for the life you already have. So maybe you don't need a 10-year plan. Maybe today's goal can simply be this: to fully experience this moment without worrying about the next. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Number 5, work less, live more. Jack used to wear busyness as a badge of honor. He was the guy who always worked late, the one who sent emails at 2 a.m., the one who bragged about how little sleep he got. He didn't just work, he lived to work. For years, he believed that success required sacrifice, that grinding for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, was the price of greatness. He convinced himself that one day he would slow down, but one day never came. Jack's reality check arrived the day he sat in his backyard, sipping coffee, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he just existed without feeling guilty. When was the last time he read a book without checking his phone? When was the last time he watched the sunset without thinking about emails? When was the last time he enjoyed a meal without mentally planning his next meeting? For years, he had mistaken being productive for being alive. But work isn't the enemy. The problem isn't that we work, it's how we let work consume us. Jack didn't hate his job. What he hated was how he had let it steal his life. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short life, but that we waste a lot of it." And Jack had wasted years thinking that if he just worked harder, if he just pushed a little more, he'd finally arrive. But arrive where? Jack didn't quit work because he was lazy. He quit because he realized he had been living backwards. He had designed his life around work instead of designing work around his life. The truth is, not everyone can or should quit their job. But what we can all do is question why we are working so hard in the first place. Are we working because we love what we do? Or are we working because we're afraid of what will happen if we stop? Jack realized that the true measure of success isn't how much you work, it's how much you live. So now, instead of chasing deadlines, he chases sunrises. Instead of answering emails, he answers to himself. And instead of waiting for one day to slow down, he chooses to live today. And maybe that's the real success. Number 6, it's not about doing less, it's about doing what matters. Jack thought quitting his job would bring him peace, but after the initial relief, he felt something unexpected: restlessness. He had spent years imagining how wonderful it would be to have all the free time in the world. No alarms, no emails, no deadlines. And yet, when he finally had it, he felt lost. For the first few weeks, he indulged in the idea of doing nothing. He slept in, binge-watched TV, scrolled endlessly through his social media. And then, boredom set in. He realized something crucial. He didn't need to escape work. He needed to escape meaningless work. Quitting his job wasn't the answer. Finding purpose was. So Jack did something different. Instead of asking, "What should I do to be successful?" he asked, "What do I actually care about?" He started writing again, something he had always loved but never had time for. He picked up books that had been collecting dust for years. He joined a community project, using his skills in ways that felt fulfilling instead of exhausting. And that's when he understood. Life isn't about doing less, it's about doing what matters. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others unless it is to some mutual benefit." In other words, don't waste your time on things that don't bring you closer to a meaningful life. Jack's biggest mistake wasn't working hard, it was working hard on things that didn't truly matter to him. Most people think the opposite of hustle is laziness. It's not. The opposite of meaningless hustle is intentional action. Jack didn't stop working, he just started working on things that fulfilled him. And that made all the difference. So maybe the question isn't, how can I do less? Maybe the real question is, how can I do what actually matters? Because when you work on something you love, it doesn't feel like work, it feels like living. Number 7, don't quit because you're tired. Build a life you don't need to escape from. Jack didn't quit his job because he was lazy, and he certainly didn't quit because he was weak. He quit because he realized something most people never do. Working yourself into the ground isn't a badge of honor. For years, he had convinced himself that if he just worked a little harder, climbed a little higher, made a little more money, then everything would finally feel right. But no matter how much he achieved, the feeling of exhaustion never went away. At one point, he thought quitting was the only way out. But what if that wasn't true? What if the problem wasn't the job itself, but the way he was letting it control his entire life? Most people assume that if they're unhappy, the answer is to quit, to walk away, start over, wipe the slate clean. But not everyone can, and not everyone should. The real question isn't, should I quit my job? It's how can I build a life where my job doesn't consume me? The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters." Jack could have quit and still felt empty, because the truth is, a meaningless life doesn't magically become meaningful just because you remove a job. Instead, he learned to create balance. He set boundaries. He stopped glorifying overwork. He started asking himself, does this job serve me or am I serving it? Jack realized he didn't have to choose between quitting and suffering. There was a middle path, one where work was just a part of life, not the whole thing. Not everyone needs to quit their job to be happy, but everyone needs to stop letting their job define their entire existence. Because real freedom isn't about walking away. It's about knowing that you could, but choosing to stay on your own terms. Number 8, maybe happiness isn't about moving faster. It's about knowing where you're going. Jack used to believe that speed meant success. The faster he climbed the corporate ladder, the more he achieved. The further ahead he got, the better. He was always in a rush, always looking at the next milestone, always sprinting toward the future. But one day after he had finally quit his job, he had a strange realization. He had been running his whole life without ever questioning where he was going. It was like being on a train that never stopped. No time to look out the window, no time to appreciate the journey, just the constant urgency to reach the next station. But what if he had been heading in the wrong direction all along? For years, Jack had told himself that as long as he was moving forward, he was doing the right thing. But moving forward to where? The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "If one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable." In other words, it doesn't matter how fast you're going if you have no idea where you actually want to end up. Jack spent so much time chasing success that he never asked himself a simple question, is this even the life I want? And that's when he realized, happiness isn't about going faster. It's about making sure you're on the right path. You don't need to rush. You don't need to exhaust yourself trying to keep up. You just need to stop for a moment, take a breath, and ask yourself, am I even going where I want to go? No. Because no amount of speed will make up for heading in the wrong direction. Number 9, financial freedom isn't about retiring early. It's about having choices. Jack didn't quit his job on impulse. He didn't wake up one day, throw his resignation letter on his boss's desk, and walk away like some dramatic movie scene. No, he left because he could. And he could because he had prepared. For years, Jack had been quietly building his financial safety net, not because he planned to retire early, but because he understood something most people don't. Money isn't about luxury, it's about freedom. Most people work because they have to. They stay in jobs they hate, tolerate toxic workplaces, and sacrifice their happiness. Not because they want to, but because they don't have a choice. Jack never wanted to be in that position. So he saved, he invested, he built his financial foundation while he was still working, so that when the time came, he wouldn't be making decisions out of desperation. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." True financial independence isn't about having millions in the bank. It's about knowing that if tomorrow you needed to walk away, you could. Jack didn't quit his job because he was burned out. He quit because he had the power to choose. And that's the real lesson. You don't need to retire early. You just need to make sure your financial situation gives you options. Because when you have choices, you're never trapped. And that's what real freedom looks like. Number 10, your job doesn't define you, but it can give you meaning if you know where to look. Jack spent most of his life believing that work was his identity. It wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. His job title, his salary, his achievements, all of it made him feel valuable. But after he left, he had a moment of crisis. If he wasn't his job, then who was he? For months, he struggled with that question. At first, he thought the solution was to reject work altogether, to live life without schedules, without meetings, without obligations. But then he realized something surprising. It wasn't work itself that had been the problem. It was the way he had let it consume him. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And Jack finally understood that his happiness at work had never depended on the job itself. It depended on how he chose to see it. Work can be soul-crushing if you let it be, or it can be a source of purpose, growth, and fulfillment. Jack started reflecting on what he actually enjoyed about his career. It wasn't the long hours or the relentless pressure. It was problem solving. It was helping people. It was creating something valuable. So instead of quitting work entirely, he changed his approach. He found ways to set boundaries so work no longer invaded his personal life. He focused on projects that excited him instead of just chasing promotions. He stopped tying his self-worth to his job title and started valuing his life outside of work. And suddenly, work wasn't a burden anymore. It was just one part of his life, not the whole thing. Most people assume that freedom means walking away from work completely, but that's not always the case. Sometimes freedom is simply realizing that work doesn't own you. You own it. So before you decide that quitting is the only way out, ask yourself, is the problem my job, or is it the way I've been letting it define me? Because maybe, just maybe, the answer isn't leaving everything behind. Maybe the answer is taking control. Number 11, happiness isn't about having more. It's about having enough. Jack used to believe that happiness was always just one more achievement away. One more promotion, one more investment, one more milestone. He thought that if he just made another million, then, finally, he could slow down. But that finish line never came, because every time he reached his goal, his mind immediately replaced it with a bigger one. The house needed to be bigger. The car needed to be better. The bank account needed to be fuller. Until one day after he had quit, he found himself sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee. For the first time in years, there was nothing to do. No emails, no meetings, no deadlines. Just the warmth of the sun, the quiet hum of the world waking up, and the simple pleasure of doing nothing. And in that moment, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not excitement, not ambition, just contentment. That's when it hit him. Happiness had never been about getting more. It had always been about appreciating what was already there. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." Jack had spent years chasing something that was already within his reach. And then he realized another truth. Stopping didn't cause the world to collapse. For years, he had feared that if he slowed down, he would lose everything. That if he wasn't constantly pushing, constantly achieving, constantly grinding, something terrible would happen. But nothing happened. The world didn't fall apart. His value as a person didn't disappear. The people who mattered still cared about him. The only thing that changed was his perspective. He had been running from an illusion, the fear that he was only as good as his last accomplishment. But the truth is, you don't need to earn the right to be happy. You don't need to prove anything to deserve peace. You just need to recognize that what you've been chasing has been with you all along. So ask yourself, are you really missing something? Or have you just been too busy running to notice you already have enough? Final thoughts. This isn't a call to quit your job. This is a call to stop running just for the sake of running. Jack's story isn't about escaping work. It's about escaping the illusion that success is measured by exhaustion. It's about realizing that freedom isn't something you get after years of grinding. It's something you can create right now in the way you live, the way you work, and the way you define happiness. If you learn to find meaning in your present life, you won't have to wait until retirement to finally feel free. You won't need to burn out before you learn to rest. So take a breath. Let go of the pressure to constantly chase the next thing. Learn to appreciate where you are, understand what truly fulfills you, and define success on your own terms. Because in the end, happiness isn't about how fast you go, it's about knowing where you're going. This is Victory Stoic, where we live with intention, not just momentum. If you're ready to reclaim your time, your energy, and your peace, like, share, subscribe, and comment. I choose balance.